It wasn't the cascade of diamonds at her throat that silenced the room, nor the couture gown that clung to her like a second skin. It was the look in her eyes. Standing on the precipice of public humiliation, Juliana Pennington watched her billionaire husband Arthur guide his young mistress across the ballroom floor. Anyone else might have shattered. But Juliana wasn't just a wife. She was an architect. And as he spun another woman in the spotlight he'd stolen from her, she made a decision. She wouldn't just expose their affair. She would detonate the very foundation of his empire. This isn't a story of heartbreak. It's the story of a queen taking back her kingdom, armed with nothing but a microphone and a truth more devastating than any affair. The grand ballroom of the Astoria Hotel was suffocating in its own opulence. A galaxy of crystal chandeliers rained down a cold, fractured light upon New York's elite. The air thick with the competing scents of expensive perfume and the faint metallic tang of ambition. This was the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, an event Arthur Pennington, founder and CEO of Pennington Innovations, chaired with the proprietary air of a man who didn't just attend charity events, but owned the very concept of charity itself. From her seat at the head table, Juliana Pennington watched him work the room. To the uninitiated, Arthur was a titan of modern industry, a charismatic visionary who had revolutionized data security. His smile, a dazzling flash of white, was his primary weapon. It disarmed senators, charmed investors, and for a time had convinced Juliana that the man she'd married was the same man the world adored. Now she saw the mechanics behind it, the slight upward tilt of the chin for condescension, the crinkle at the eyes for feigned sincerity, the way it never ever truly reached his own. She smoothed a non-existent crease in the shimmering gunmetal grey silk of her gown. Her dress was a statement, elegant, severe, and impenetrable. It was a suit of armor for a battle she hadn't known she was fighting until it was almost too late. For the past year, the distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm. It started with late nights at the office, hushed phone calls he'd walk into another room to take, and a new, almost manic obsession with his public image. He had always been vain, but this was different. It was defensive. Juliana had been more than a silent partner in his ascent. In the early days in their cramped Palo Alto apartment, it was her code that formed the bedrock of Pennington Innovations' first patent. It was her quiet, meticulous business plan that had secured their first round of funding when Arthur's blustering charm had failed. She was the architect. He was the gilded facade. But as the billions rolled in, her name had been gently systematically erased from the company's history, relegated to the role of supportive wife. He had rewritten their shared story, and she, lost in the whirlwind of their success and the birth of their son, had allowed it to happen. "He's in his element, isn't he?" A voice purred beside her. It was Beatrice Vance, a formidable woman whose husband ran a rival hedge fund. Her eyes, however, weren't on Arthur. They were fixed on a younger woman holding court near the silent auction table. "That's your husband's new senior analyst, isn't it? Amelia Vance?" "No relation. Thank God." Juliana's gaze followed. Amelia Vance. Of course. She was everything Juliana was not: effervescent, overtly ambitious, with a hungry look that she mistook for passion. She wore a crimson dress that was a slash of defiance in the sea of muted, tasteful colors. Juliana had seen her before in passing at company events. A bright young thing from Wharton, whom Arthur had personally mentored, fast-tracking her to a position of influence that made no logistical sense. Juliana had ignored the signs, burying her suspicions under the weight of a 20-year marriage and the hope that she was simply being paranoid. But the whispers had become too loud, the evidence too stark. The private credit card statements she wasn't supposed to see, detailing trips to St. Bart's that coincided with Amelia's Instagram posts. The lingering scent of a floral perfume jasmine and something sharp in Arthur's car. She certainly made an impression, Juliana replied, her voice a placid lake over a churning abyss. She's made something dear, Beatrice muttered, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. Arthur was laughing now, a deep, booming sound that commanded attention. He had his hand on the small of Amelia's back. It was a gesture of ownership, casual and confident, performed for an audience he believed was too dazzled by his brilliance to see the betrayal. But Juliana saw it, and in that moment she felt the last vestiges of her denial crumble into dust. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice in her chest. But beneath the pain, something else was crystallizing, a cold, hard resolve. She had tolerated the sidelining, the erasure of her contributions, the slow, painful death of their partnership. She had convinced herself it was the price of the life they had built, the price of stability for their son Alexander, who was safely away at boarding school, shielded from this toxic charade. But this public spectacle of humiliation was a line he had not just crossed, but danced upon. Arthur finally returned to the table, his face flushed with adoration, not for her, but from the sycophants he'd just left. "Juliana, darling, you're looking tense. Have a drink. Enjoy the evening we've put together." He gestured expansively, as if he had personally hung the chandeliers. "I am enjoying it, Arthur," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "I'm finding it all very illuminating." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He searched her face, looking for the familiar acquiescence, the gentle deference he had come to expect. He found none. He saw only a stranger, a woman with eyes like polished steel. "Good," he said, turning away, already scanning the crowd for his next admirer. "The auction for the pediatric wing is about to begin. My speech is after. I'll expect you to be smiling." It wasn't a request. It was an order. One last order she would pretend to obey. As the lights dimmed and the auctioneer took the stage, Juliana discreetly slid her hand into her evening bag. She didn't touch the spare lipstick or the compact mirror. Her fingers closed around a small, sleek USB drive. It contained a different kind of truth. Not just the truth of his infidelity, but the truth of his success. The truth of a project code-named Chimera. She had stumbled upon it by accident, looking for an old tax document on their home server. A mislabeled folder, a password that was with grim irony, her own birthday. InScene was a labyrinth of deception. Shell corporations falsified data reports submitted to investors, backdoors built into the security software they sold to Fortune 500 companies, software she had helped design. He had taken her brilliant protective code and twisted it into a skeleton key, selling security on the one hand, while creating vulnerabilities he could exploit on the other. And the architect of this fraudulent data scheme, the one who managed the flow of information and cooked the books. The project lead was listed as A. Vance. Amelia. It all clicked into place. The affair wasn't just a sordid dalliance. It was a business partnership. Amelia wasn't just a mistress. She was an accomplice. Arthur hadn't just betrayed his marriage. He had betrayed every client, every investor, and the very principles on which their empire was supposedly built. The auctioneer's voice droned on, listing off 7-figure bids for luxury vacations and priceless art. Juliana felt strangely detached, as if she were watching a film of her own life. She saw the path ahead with terrifying clarity. She could remain silent, keep her gilded cage, and let the poison spread. Or she could burn it all to the ground. Arthur patted her hand, a perfunctory, possessive gesture. "Get ready to be proud of me, darling." "Oh, Arthur," she said, looking him directly in the eye, a faint, chilling smile touching her lips. "I have no doubt that tonight will be a night you'll never forget." The final bid for a week on Richard Branson's private island closed at a staggering $2 million, drawing a wave of performative applause. The auctioneer, a man with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, beamed at the crowd. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce the man whose vision and generosity make nights like this possible, the chairman of the Starlight Children's Foundation, the titan of technology. Please welcome Mr. Arthur Pennington." A spotlight found Arthur as he rose from his chair. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket, basking in the adulation. He gave Juliana's shoulder a final proprietary squeeze. "Here we go," he whispered, his breath smelling of champagne and self-satisfaction. He strode toward the stage, his gait filled with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed he was the master of his own universe. Juliana watched him go, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was the moment. The point of no return. Arthur's speech was exactly what she expected, a masterful tapestry of feigned humility and carefully crafted sound bites. He spoke of hope, of legacy, of the profound responsibility that came with great wealth. He painted a picture of himself as a benevolent king, bestowing his blessings upon the less fortunate. The crowd was captivated, hanging on every word. "We are not just building a company," he declared, his voice resonating with rehearsed passion. "We are building a better future, a more secure future for our children." Juliana almost laughed at the irony. A secure future built on a foundation of lies. Then came the part she knew was coming, the part that was for an audience of one, Amelia. "And of course, none of this is possible without inspiration," Arthur continued, letting his gaze drift from the teleprompter. He scanned the crowd, and with the subtlety of a freight train, his eyes landed on the slash of crimson in the third row. He smiled, a private, intimate smile that was horrifyingly public, to the fire that fuels the engine, to the spark of brilliance that challenges us to be better. The room was silent, but 1,000 unspoken messages crackled in the air. People shifted in their seats. Glances were exchanged. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Juliana felt the stares of 100 people, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was no longer Juliana Pennington, a woman of substance and intellect. She was the wife, a tragic figure in a drama not of her own making. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her, trying to crush her. She could feel her composure threatening to crack. The sting of tears pricked at the back of her eyes. She could flee. She could run to the powder room and collapse in a heap of grey silk and shattered dignity. That was what everyone expected. That was what he expected. But as she looked at Arthur preening on stage, and at Amelia, who was now looking down with a demure yet triumphant smile, the grief inside her flash froze into something harder, something more potent rage. A pure, clarifying rage that burned away the pain and left only purpose. He was not just disrespecting her. He was using this stage, this noble cause, as a backdrop for his sordid little power play. He was desecrating the memory of the company they had built together, the dreams they had once shared. Arthur finished his speech to thunderous applause and a standing ovation. As the lights came up slightly, a live orchestra began to play a soft, romantic ballad. It was the signal for the ceremonial first dance. Traditionally, the chairman and his wife would take the floor. Arthur descended the stage, his face aglow. He walked right past Juliana. The room held its collective breath. With a confidence that was breathtaking in its audacity, he extended his hand, not to his wife of 20 years, but to the woman in the crimson dress, to Amelia Vance. Amelia looked momentarily surprised, a flicker of what might have been genuine shock or expertly feigned modesty. She glanced at Juliana, a silent, insolent question in her eyes. Then she placed her hand in Arthur's. The gasps were audible now, sharp intakes of breath rippling through the ballroom. Beatrice Vance, sitting beside Juliana, reached out and placed a hand on her arm. "That man," she hissed, "has no soul." Juliana didn't flinch. She watched them walk to the center of the vast, polished dance floor. The orchestra, after a moment of confused hesitation, swelled into the melody of a classic waltz. Arthur placed one hand on Amelia's waist, the other engulfing her hand, and began to move. They were a striking couple. His commanding presence, her youthful fire. They moved with a practiced ease that spoke of hours spent together away from the prying eyes of the world. Now they were broadcasting their intimacy, turning the dance floor into their own private island, inviting 1,000 people to witness Juliana's ultimate disgrace. Every turn, every dip, every shared smile was a fresh cut. He was erasing her, publicly replacing her, declaring her obsolete. The pitying stares intensified, but Juliana no longer felt them. She was insulated by her newfound purpose. She was no longer watching a betrayal. She was watching a target position himself perfectly in her sights. She rose from her chair. Her movement was so deliberate, so calm, that it commanded more attention than a hysterical outburst ever could. Beatrice's hand fell away. A hush began to spread from their table outwards, as people noticed the wife, the scorned wife, was now on her feet. She did not look at the dancing couple. Her eyes were fixed on the stage, which the MC was now approaching to thank Arthur for his speech. Juliana's path was clear. With a straight back and a steady, measured pace, she began to walk. She walked past tables of stunned onlookers, her gunmetal grey dress a whisper of steel moving through the gilded chaos. Arthur lost in his triumph, and Amelia's adoring gaze hadn't noticed. He spun his mistress in a final dramatic flourish as the song came to its end, her red dress flaring around them like a flame. By the time he looked up, basking in the awkward, scattered applause, it was too late. Juliana had already reached the side of the stage. The MC, a local news anchor named Michael Shaw, saw her approaching, his professional smile faltering into confusion. "Mrs. Pennington," he asked, his voice low. "Is everything all right?" Juliana didn't answer him. Her eyes were locked on the lectern in the center of the stage. The microphone was still live. She ascended the 3 short steps. The spotlight, which had been fading, suddenly found her. The room fell into a deep, profound silence. On the dance floor, Arthur froze. The smug, triumphant look on his face evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. He saw his wife standing on his stage, in his spotlight. And for the first time that evening, Arthur Pennington looked afraid. Juliana stepped up to the lectern, her gloved hands gripping its sides. She leaned toward the microphone, her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild, terrifying drumbeat of liberation. She took a breath and looked out, not at the crowd, but directly at her husband. The silence in the Astoria Grand Ballroom was a living entity. It was absolute, heavier than the crystal chandeliers, deeper than the pockets of the men and women who now stared utterly transfixed at the woman on the stage. The orchestra had trailed off into a confused discordance before falling quiet. Waitstaff froze mid-stride trays of champagne glasses held aloft like offerings to a new unpredictable deity. Juliana Pennington stood in the lone spotlight, a figure carved from ice and will. She didn't weep. She didn't scream. Her poise was more unsettling than any display of hysteria could ever be. Her gaze remained locked on Arthur, who was still standing in the middle of the dance floor. Amelia, a scarlet shadow at his side. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, the ghost of a woman he thought he had successfully buried. "Good evening," Juliana said. Her voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, was crisp and clear. It cut through the silence like a scalpel. There was no tremor, no hint of tears. It was the voice she used in boardrooms, the voice of calm, irrefutable authority he hadn't heard in years. "I apologize for the interruption." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air, dripping with an irony so thick it was almost tangible. But my husband, in his wonderful speech, spoke of inspiration, of legacy. And it moved me. It moved me to share a more complete version of the story. A nervous murmur rippled through the audience. This was no longer just a marital spat. It was becoming a public execution. Marcus Thorne, a veteran reporter for the New York Times, who was seated near the front, had already discreetly activated the voice recorder on his phone. Juliana's eyes scanned the room, acknowledging the powerful faces staring back at her. "Many of you in this room are investors in Pennington Innovations. You are partners. You have entrusted my husband with your capital, your confidence, and your own corporate security. You believe in the story of a brilliant man who built an unbreachable fortress to protect the world's data." She let her gaze drift back to Arthur. "It is a wonderful story. And like all the best stories, it is a magnificent fiction." A collective gasp went through the room. Arthur took a step forward, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Juliana, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" "Get off that stage." His voice was a harsh whisper, but in the unnerving quiet it carried. Juliana ignored him, her focus absolute. Arthur is right about one thing. He didn't do it alone. In the beginning we were partners. While he was the face, the voice, the dazzling salesman, I was the architect. I wrote the foundational code for our Sentinel security suite. My algorithm, my design. A design based on a simple sacred principle, inviolability. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. A fortress has walls to keep people out, but the most effective fortress, the most profitable one, has a secret door that only the king can open. For years I believed we were building walls. I was wrong. My husband and his protégé have been building doors. The spotlight felt hot on her skin, but inside she was ice cold. She saw Amelia's face now, the color draining from it, the triumphant smirk replaced by a dawning, panicked comprehension. "I believe the board members from Sterling Cooper Capital are here tonight." Juliana asked, her tone deceptively pleasant. She scanned the front tables. A few men in bespoke suits shifted uncomfortably. "And the representatives from the Viridian Group. Your companies, along with 24 other Fortune 500 firms, are flagship clients of our Sentinel-class security." She didn't need to wait for a reply. "I'm sure you'll be fascinated to learn then about Project Chimera. The name landed like a stone in a still pond. There was no recognition from the audience, but on the dance floor, Arthur flinched as if he'd been struck. Amelia took an involuntary step back, her eyes wide with terror. Project Chimera, Juliana continued, her voice resonating with cold, hard clarity, is the unofficial, highly confidential and wildly illegal R&D initiative at the heart of Pennington Innovations' recent profit boom. It's a simple, elegant piece of fraud. While we sell you impenetrable security, Project Chimera actively develops and maintains a series of master backdoors in that very software. We sell the lock, and we sell the skeleton key. The room erupted. The low murmur exploded into a roar of shock and outrage. The scene devolved into chaos. Phones were not just out, they were held high recording. Marcus Thorne was already on his feet, moving toward the stage. Arthur finally broke from his paralysis. Lies! She's hysterical security! He bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. He started moving toward the stage, pushing through the throng of onlookers. My wife is unwell. She's having a breakdown. Am I? Juliana's voice sliced through the din, regaining control. She held up her left hand, and in it the small USB drive she had taken from her purse. It glinted under the spotlight. This is not hysteria. This is data. This is a complete internal audit of Project Chimera. Codenames, timelines, encrypted communications. It contains the schematics of the back doors, a list of every client who has been compromised, and most importantly, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, where the profits from this special access have been diverted. She looked directly at Amelia, whose face was now a ghastly shade of white against her crimson dress. It also includes every single progress report and financial transfer authorized by the project's lead analyst, a very bright, very ambitious young woman named Amelia Vance. The match had been struck. The Inferno was about to begin. The revelation of Amelia's name was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The chaos in the ballroom instantly stratified. The merely curious backed away, creating a ring of horrified spectators. The personally invested, the board members, the investors, the high-powered clients surged forward, their faces contorted with rage and disbelief. Shouts of, "What is she talking about? And is this true?" echoed off the frescoed ceiling. Amelia Vance looked as though the floor had vanished from beneath her feet. Her carefully constructed world of ambition, seduction, and power had been vaporized in a single, perfectly enunciated sentence. She looked from Juliana's cold, implacable face on the stage to Arthur's approaching storm of fury, and her composure shattered. She was no longer a brilliant analyst or a coveted mistress. She was a cornered animal. "He made me," she stammered, the words barely audible, directed at no one and everyone. "He told me it was a contingency, a security stress test." Arthur finally reached the foot of the stage, his handsome face purple with rage. Two burly security guards in ill-fitting tuxedos were close behind him. "Shut her up!" he roared at them, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "Get that microphone away from her. Now!" But the guards hesitated, caught between the fury of their billionaire benefactor and the surreal high-stakes drama unfolding before them. They were security for a charity gala, prepared for drunkards and gate crashers, not for the live broadcast implosion of a corporate empire. Juliana held her ground, the USB drive held up like a talisman. "Ask him about the Axiom Holdings account number 7345B at the Grand Cayman National Bank." She projected her voice, overriding the rising tide of noise. An account opened 6 months ago. An account that received 3 separate 7-figure wire transfers from a shell corporation based in Panama. A shell corporation whose sole purpose is to sell proprietary client data, your data, to the highest bidder on the dark web. A man in the front, a portly executive Juliana recognized as Robert Mayfield, CEO of a major logistics firm, turned on Arthur. "My God, Arthur, we just signed a 9-figure security contract with you last month. Is what she's saying true?" "It's slander. It's corporate espionage," Arthur yelled finally, scrambling up the side of the stage himself, his elegant tuxedo now disheveled. He lunged for the lectern, for the microphone for his wife. Juliana stepped back, calmly, pulling the microphone from its stand with a practiced movement. She never took her eyes off him. "He will tell you I'm vindictive. He will tell you I'm a scorned woman, seeking revenge for his infidelity." She gestured with her free hand toward the dance floor, where Amelia stood weeping openly now. "And he is not wrong. I am a scorned woman. He made sure of that tonight. But my hurt is irrelevant. This," she held up the USB drive again, "is not about my marriage. It's about his fraud." The security guards, spurred into action by Arthur's physical presence on the stage, finally moved toward her. But it was too late. The damage was done. Every phone in the room was a weapon aimed at Arthur Pennington. Marcus Thorne of the Times was already dictating furiously to his editor. "That's PROJECTCHIMERA. Yes, it's the wife. On stage. Get a team ready." Arthur reached Juliana, his hand grabbing her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh like talons. "You're destroying us," he hissed, his charismatic mask completely gone, revealing the snarling, desperate man beneath. "You're destroying everything." "No," Arthur, Juliana said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, meant only for him, though the microphone still carried it to the silent watching room. "You destroyed us. You destroyed it all the moment you decided your genius was a license to steal. I'm just turning on the lights." She wrenched her arm from his grasp with a strength that surprised them both. At that moment, the hotel security, finally realizing the situation was far beyond the capabilities of the event staff, arrived in force. They were professional, organized, and moved with purpose, creating a cordon around the stage. Arthur, seeing the new uniforms, seeing the professional calm in their eyes, seemed to shrink. The fight went out of him, replaced by the cold, stark terror of a man who had just lost complete control. He looked out at the sea of faces, former friends, former allies, former admirers, and saw only condemnation. He saw his legacy turning to ash. Down on the floor, the scene was one of utter pandemonium. Amelia Vance, seeing the professional security and hearing the shouts for the SEC and federal investigators, made a desperate move. She turned and fled, pushing past stunned guests, her crimson dress a blur. She ran for the exit, sobbing a high-pitched, panicked sound. She didn't get far. 2 of the hotel security men intercepted her before she could reach the lobby, holding her gently but firmly by the arms. Her flight was an admission of guilt more damning than any document. On stage, Juliana stood poised and still amidst the wreckage she had wrought. She looked at the man she had loved, the man with whom she had built a life and an empire, and felt a profound, aching emptiness. There was no triumph, no joy, only the grim satisfaction of a necessary, painful amputation. She walked calmly over to the edge of the stage toward Marcus Thorne, who was now being held back by a security guard. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady. The reporter's eyes were wide with professional glee and genuine shock. "Mrs. Pennington." She held out the USB drive. "I believe this belongs in the hands of someone who will know what to do with it. I have already sent a password-protected copy to the Enforcement Division of the SEC and to my attorney. The password will be released in 1 hour. This is your head start." Thorne's hand shot out, taking the small piece of plastic and metal as if it were the Holy Grail. "Mrs. Pennington, why?" he asked the journalist in him, unable to resist the question. Juliana looked back at Arthur, who was now being quietly but firmly escorted off the other side of the stage, his face slack with shock. Because she said the microphone, catching her final devastating words before a guard finally cut the power. Some of us still believe that a fortress should protect the people inside, not just the king on his throne. The spotlight died. The ballroom was plunged into a babble of frantic conversation and the harsh functional light of the hotel's main fixtures. The party was over. The Inferno had just begun. The hours that followed were a blur of structured chaos. The Starlight Children's Foundation. Gala did not so much end as it was quarantined, becoming the epicenter of a story that was already exploding across the globe. The Astoria Hotel, in cooperation with the NYPD, who had arrived with quiet, grim efficiency, locked the ballroom down. No one was allowed to leave without giving a preliminary statement. Juliana was escorted not to a police car, but to a private suite on one of the upper floors, her attorney Benjamin Carter having been summoned and arriving with the speed of a man who knew his billing hour for this night would become legendary. He was a small, precise man with eyes that missed nothing. He found Juliana standing by the vast window, looking down at the river of red and blue lights flashing silently on the street below. Her armor, the gunmetal grey dress, now felt impossibly heavy. "The SEC has already been in touch," Ben said, his voice calm and grounding. "They received your package. They have the password. An emergency injunction is being filed to freeze all Pennington Innovations assets, personal and corporate. Arthur and Ms. Vance are being held for questioning in separate locations. It's moving fast, Juliana. Faster than I've ever seen." "Good," she said, her voice distant. She hadn't asked about her son, Alexander. He was safe at his school hundreds of miles away, but she knew this tidal wave would reach him eventually. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, a cost she had calculated, but still dreaded paying. Marcus Thorne's initial online report broke the internet an hour ago. Ben continued looking at his phone. "The Pennington Papers," he's calling it. "The stock is already in freefall in after-hours trading. It will be worthless by morning. You didn't just expose a fraud, Juliana. You decapitated a multinational corporation." She turned from the window. "It was a cancer. I removed it, and the patient is dead," Ben countered softly. "Thousands of employees, pension funds, an entire ecosystem. We'll be better off once the rot is gone." She finished, her voice hardening again. Those employees were working for a criminal enterprise. Their pensions were invested in a lie. The truth is always brutal, Ben. That doesn't make it wrong. He saw the unshakable conviction in her eyes and nodded slowly. "The district attorney's office will want to offer you immunity in exchange for your full testimony." "I don't need immunity," she replied. "I haven't broken any laws." "Juliana," he said, his tone sharpening with professional concern. "You were on the board. You were a co-founder. They will argue you must have known. that your silence was complicity. This was the part she had prepared for the move in the chess game she knew was coming. I have my own documentation, my logs, my own internal audits from the moment I suspected something was wrong. Voicemails I saved, emails I flagged. I have a clear documented timeline of my own discovery. My internal objections to Arthur, which were dismissed, and my decision to act once I had irrefutable proof. I am not an accomplice. I am the key witness. Ben stared at her, a slow smile of pure admiration spreading across his face. You magnificent woman. You didn't just bring a bomb to the party. You built the fallout shelter first. For the first time that night, a flicker of something other than ice and pain touched Juliana's lips. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. A good architect always plans for demolition. Downstairs, the gilded cage had become an interrogation room. Arthur Pennington, stripped of his charm and his power, sat in a hotel conference room that now served as a makeshift command post. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, petulant silence. He demanded his own lawyer, refusing to answer any questions. He kept looking at the door, as if expecting someone to walk in and tell him this was all a terrible misunderstanding. No one came. In another room, Amelia Vance had crumbled completely. Her confession, interspersed with hysterical sobs, tumbled out. She painted herself as a victim, a brilliant young woman seduced and manipulated by a powerful man. She claimed she thought Project Chimera was a theoretical exercise that she didn't understand the true implications until it was too late. But the digital trail Juliana had provided was absolute. Amelia's digital signature was on every fraudulent report, every illegal transfer. She was not a pawn, she was the project manager. Her desperation was not that of an innocent, but of a co-conspirator who had been outplayed. As the sun began to rise over the city, casting long grey shadows across the deserted ballroom, Juliana knew her old life was over. The homes, the jets, the status, all of it was gone, incinerated in the fire she had started. The name Pennington, once a symbol of innovation and success, would now be synonymous with disgrace. Ben finally closed his briefcase. They're ready for you to give your formal statement. After that, I'm taking you to a secure location. The press is already camped outside your townhouse. It's going to be a storm. Juliana nodded. She felt strangely calm. The weight of her secret of her husband's betrayal had been lifted. In its place was a vast, uncertain future. She had lost her past and torched her present. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt free. As they walked toward the door, Ben paused. Are you ready for this? Juliana looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the hotel window. The exhausted woman in the impossibly expensive dress looked back at her. The queen was in ruins, her castle was gone. But she was still the queen. I've been ready for a long time, she said. Let's begin. She had walked into the gala as a billionaire's wife. She was walking out as the architect of his downfall, the guardian of a truth he had tried to bury, and the master of her own uncertain fate. The dance was over, but her new life was just beginning. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since the world had tilted on its axis in the Astoria Grand Ballroom. For Juliana, time had become a strange, fluid concept. The days were long and quiet, marked only by the shifting tides outside the windows of the secluded Hamptons beach house where Ben Carter had installed her. The nights were longer, filled with the phantom echoes of a life that no longer existed. The storm she had unleashed had been more ferocious than even she had anticipated. Pennington Innovations ceased to exist within 48 hours of her speech. The stock, which had once been the darling of the Nasdaq, was delisted after its value was reduced to fractions of a cent. The sleek glass and steel headquarters in Silicon Valley, once a symbol of impenetrable security, was now a tomb swarmed by federal agents and court-appointed liquidators picking over its bones. The media had dubbed it the Great Unraveling. Arthur and Amelia were no longer just disgraced figures from a society gala. They were characters in a federal indictment. Their journey through the legal system was a spectacle of contrasts. Arthur, released on a multi-million-dollar bail bond secured against the last of his untainted assets, was a portrait of belligerent denial. Photographed entering his lawyer's office, he was always impeccably dressed, his face set in a scowl of indignation. His legal strategy was aggressive and ugly, to paint Juliana as a mentally unstable, vindictive shrew who conspired with corporate rivals to destroy him out of jealousy. He was suing her for defamation, a move so audacious Ben Carter had laughed out loud when he read the filing. Amelia Vance's fall was far less defiant. Unable to meet her bail, she remained in federal custody, her courtroom appearances a study in disintegration. The vibrant crimson dress was replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit that hung from her diminished frame. Her Wharton-honed confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified young woman who wept silently during arraignments. Her court-appointed defender was angling for a plea deal, presenting her as Arthur's brainwashed pawn. But the prosecution, armed with Juliana's pristine data, had little incentive to be merciful. The digital trail showed Amelia wasn't just following orders. She was an innovator in the fraud, often proposing more efficient ways to monetize the stolen data. Juliana followed the proceedings with a detached sense of duty, reading the updates Ben sent her each morning. She felt no satisfaction in their ruin, only a grim sense of inevitability, as if she were reading the final pages of a history book she had been forced to write. Her chosen isolation was a necessity. She was both a pariah and a hero, depending on the headline. To some, she was the fury of Fifth Avenue, a woman who had immolated her own family for revenge. To others, especially in tech and finance circles, she was the architect, a whistleblower of unparalleled courage. She had received letters of support from cybersecurity experts and anonymous, grateful notes from employees of evil companies who had long suspected Pennington's underhanded dealings. She had also received death threats, vile misogynistic emails that Ben's security team filtered out, but whose existence was a constant low-level hum of menace. The true cost of her actions, the one that kept her awake at night, was Alexander. He had been shielded at his boarding school, the administration, creating a protective bubble around him. But the news was inescapable. His father was a world-famous felon. His mother was the one who had exposed him. For the first few weeks, their calls had been stilted and painful, full of long silences. He was confused, angry, and ashamed, and she didn't know how to fix it. That changed on a crisp Saturday morning when a black SUV crunched up the gravel driveway. Alexander emerged taller than she remembered his face, a careful mask of neutrality. He had Ben's driver with him, but he walked to the door alone. She met him on the porch, the salty wind whipping strands of hair across her face. For a moment, they just stood there, a mother and son, separated by a chasm of scandal. "Hi, Mum," he said, his voice deeper than she was used to. "Alexander." She breathed, her heart aching. "Thank you for coming." Inside, she made him tea, the simple domestic act feeling foreign and profound. They sat in the sun-drenched living room, the silence between them less tense now, more questioning. "I read the full indictment," he said finally, not looking at her. "The one the Times published. All the details about Project Chimera." Juliana gripped her mug. I see. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, so much like her own, were clear. He used my birthday as the password for the offshore holding account. The main one. The casual cruelty of it hit Juliana with the force of a physical blow. She had known the password to the initial folder was her birthday, a sick piece of poetic irony. But for Arthur to use their son's birth date to secure the profits of his greatest crime was a level of profane narcissism that still had the power to shock her. He told me it was all your fault, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. That you were crazy, that you were trying to hurt him because of her. What do you believe? Juliana asked, her voice quiet. I believe he's a liar, Alexander said, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. I believe he used everyone. He used you, he used me, he used all those people who worked for him. He lied to my face. He told me the company was something to be proud of, that I would run it one day. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Some legacy, huh? In that moment, the chasm closed. Juliana moved to sit beside him, wrapping her arms around her son, who was now trembling with a grief and rage he had held in for weeks. He leaned into her, and for the first time since he was a small boy, he cried in his mother's arms. She had destroyed his father's kingdom, but she had saved her son from ever having to rule it. Later that week, Ben Carter arrived with news that wasn't about the ongoing legal battle. He carried a leather-bound portfolio and wore an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The liquidation is proceeding, he said, setting the portfolio on the coffee table. It's a fire sale. The patents, the infrastructure, the client lists, all being sold for parts. A group of former executives from Sterling Cooper Mayfield Logistics and a few others you, enlightened, at the gala have formed a consortium. To pick the carcass clean, I imagine, Juliana said, tiredly. Not exactly, Ben said, tapping the portfolio. They're starting a new company, a cybersecurity firm built on ethical principles, total transparency. They want to restore faith in the industry. They see an opportunity in the vacuum Pennington left. Good for them, she said, uninterested. Ben opened the portfolio. Inside was a single, elegantly printed document. They have a name for it already. They're calling it Juliana Systems. She stared at him, speechless. It's more than a name, Juliana. It's an offer. They want you. Not as a figurehead. Not as a silent partner. They want you as Chief Technology Officer. They want the architect back. They want you to build the fortress you always intended to build. He slid the document across the table. It was a formal offer with a salary figure that was substantial, but it was the equity stake that was staggering. They weren't offering her a job. They were offering her a kingdom. Her own. She stared at the name Juliana Systems and felt a dizzying mix of emotions. It was vindication. It was an opportunity. It was terrifying. Could she step back into that world? The world that had cost her so much. Before she could answer, Ben's expression sobered. There's something else, he said, his voice lowering. Something my security guy picked up. It's probably nothing but... He explained that during the forensic accounting of the Chimera project, investigators had found a recurring beneficiary of the sold data. It wasn't a corporation or a dark web collective. It was a single encrypted entity referred to in Arthur's private notes only as the client. This entity paid a premium far above market rate for a very specific type of data-sensitive, geopolitical information shipping routes and proprietary energy research from Mayfield Logistics and others. The payments originated from a bank in Moldova known for laundering money for Eastern European oligarchs. Arthur wasn't just a fraud, Juliana Ben said grimly. He was verging on being an agent of a foreign power. He was selling out national interests for cash. Juliana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. This elevated the crime to a whole new level. This was treason. The FBI is handling that aspect with extreme prejudice. Ben continued. But here's the problem. The client has been cut off. Their multi-million-dollar intelligence stream has run dry because of you. These are not the kind of people who simply write a bad review on Yelp. They are dangerous. He pulled a small, plain envelope from his inner pocket. This came to my office this morning. No return address. Postmarked from a mail depot in Queens. She took it with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph printed on cheap paper. It was a telephoto shot, slightly grainy, of her and Alexander, sitting together on the couch in this very room, taken just days ago. On the back, 3 words were typed in a stark, sans serif font. We see you. The air left the room. Her safe house was compromised. The threat wasn't just online trolls anymore. It was real, it was professional, and it was watching her. The battle with Arthur. The public drama, the corporate collapse, all of it suddenly felt like a prelude. She had thought she was fighting a war against her husband's greed. She now understood she had inadvertently picked a fight with a far more lethal, shadowy enemy. She looked from the photograph, a violation of her sanctuary and her son's safety, to the job offer lying on the table, Juliana Systems. One represented the terrifying consequence of her actions, the other the potential for a powerful redemption. They were 2 sides of the same coin, her past and her future. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but as she looked at her name on that document, something else ignited within her. It was the same cold, clarifying rage she had felt at the gala. These people, these faceless monsters, thought they could intimidate her, thought she would run and hide. They had mistaken her for someone else. She slid the photograph back into the envelope and pushed it aside. She picked up the offer from Juliana Systems. Ben, she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. Call them. Tell them I accept. Her eyes met his, and he could see the steel returning. But I have some conditions. The first is that my new company's first client will be the United States government. And our first project, she said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper, will be to design a system so secure it can hunt down the very people who think they can hide in the shadows. I'm not going to be their victim. I'm going to be their competition. So the empire of glass and lies shattered on the floor of the Astoria ballroom. Arthur Pennington the Titan was brought down, not by a market crash or a corporate raider, but by the quiet, methodical wife he had underestimated. Juliana walked away from the wreckage, trading a life of gilded misery for a future she would write on her own terms. But the story doesn't end there. What happens to the thousands of employees? What sentence awaits Arthur and his accomplice, Amelia? And what would you have done in Juliana's shoes? Would you have chosen silent security over explosive, devastating truth? If this story of shattered facades and a woman's epic reclamation of power gripped you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves high-stakes drama and justice served cold. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories of truth lies and the moments that change everything. and you won't want to miss a single one.